Let's start with a secret, Dr. Reynolds said, her voice as smooth as the overpriced coffee she insisted on sipping during our sessions. I glanced at Melanie. She was perched on the edge of the couch, her legs tucked under her like a cat pretending to be calm while eyeing a canary. I'd seen that look before. She was stalling, probably concocting the kind of half-truths she thought I'd buy. Jack, Dr. Reynolds interrupted my thoughts, her tone dripping with professional patience. You first. Of course, me first. All right, I said, leaning back in the chair that was somehow both uncomfortable and smug. Here's one. I blew half our savings on sports betting last year and told Melanie it was for home improvements. Melanie's head whipped toward me, her eyes narrowing. That explains why the kitchen still looks like a set piece from the 90s. Exactly, I shot back. Authenticity is expensive. Dr. Reynolds smiled faintly, jotting something down in her notebook. I imagined it was something condescending, like Jack deflects with humor. Well, duh, Doctor. Your turn, Melanie, Dr. Reynolds prompted, turning to my wife. Melanie sighed dramatically, the kind of sigh that said, I'm the victim here, but fine, I'll play along. She tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, glanced at me, then back at Reynolds. I've been seeing someone, she said, her voice so calm it could have lulled me to sleep if it weren't for the bombshell she'd just dropped. I blinked. Surely, I misheard her. Come again? It's not what you think, she added quickly, which is exactly what people say when it's exactly what you think. Oh, do tell, I said, crossing my arms. What is it, then? A book club? A knitting circle? His name is Ryan, she continued, ignoring my jab. My ex. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Ryan? The guy who once thought business casual included sandals? That Ryan? You've been seeing Ryan? I repeated, each word dripping with disbelief. For what, fashion advice? It's not like that, she said, and there it was again, not like that. God, I hated that phrase. Dr. Reynolds leaned in slightly, her face the picture of clinical interest. Why did you feel the need to reconnect with him, Melanie? Melanie shrugged. I was curious. I wanted closure. And Jack's been so busy. Oh, good. My inability to perfect the work-life balance was now an excuse for this. Closure? I snapped. Is that what the kids are calling it these days? Closure? Dr. Reynolds held up a hand. Let's focus on understanding the why, Jack. Sure, I said, throwing up my hands. Let's understand why my wife thinks it's okay to rekindle old flames while I'm busy keeping the lights on. Melanie's cheeks flushed, but she didn't back down. It wasn't about him. It was about me. I needed to figure out who I am. Oh, and who are you, Melanie? A philosopher? A poet? Or just someone who can't resist nostalgia when it texts her after midnight? Dr. Reynolds scribbled in her notebook again. Probably Jack struggles with anger. No, I said, standing up. Jack struggles with being lied to. And I'm pretty sure that's universal. Melanie said nothing, her lips pressed into a thin line. Here's my secret, Doc, I said, turning to Dr. Reynolds. This therapy? It's a scam. And I'm done playing along. I grabbed my coat and stormed out, leaving behind a stunned Melanie, a smug notebook, and a therapist who probably already had a title for her next self-help book, How to Lose 2 Clients in 1 Hour. There's something oddly cathartic about slamming a door on your way out of a bad therapy session. It's like punctuating an argument with an exclamation mark, I'm done. Unfortunately, it's not nearly as satisfying when you realize your problems are following you home, sitting there like uninvited houseguests. I paced the living room, the memory of Melanie's closure excuse bouncing around in my head like an obnoxious pop song I couldn't shut off. Ryan. Of all people. The guy who once thought meal prepping meant slicing hot dogs into Kraft mac and cheese. And she needed closure from him. What was next? Consulting him on gourmet cooking tips? Melanie came home about an hour later. She walked in like nothing had happened, carrying a grocery bag filled with kale and overpriced juice, her weekly peace offering to our refrigerator. "How's your walk?" she asked casually, setting the bag on the counter. "Oh, enlightening," I replied, leaning against the kitchen doorway. "I've discovered that when you need closure, it's best to consult your ex. Really clears things up." Her shoulders stiffened, but she didn't turn around. "Jack, don't do this." "Do what?" "Ask my wife why she's running around with the human equivalent of a midlife crisis." She turned, her face a perfect mask of irritation and exasperation. "It wasn't running around. It was coffee. One coffee." "You're blowing this way out of proportion." "One coffee," I echoed, nodding like I'd just uncovered a universal truth. "Of course." "And what exactly did you discuss? Memories? Old flames? Or was it just small talk?" "Hey, Ryan, how's life treating you? Still wearing those awful flip-flops?" "Stop it," she said sharply, her eyes narrowing. "You're being ridiculous." "Am I?" I shot back. "You think it's ridiculous to expect my wife not to have secret coffee dates with her ex?" "It wasn't secret," she snapped. "Oh, sure. That's why you told me all about it during one of our many candid heart-to-hearts." Melanie sighed, pinching the bridge of her nose. "I knew you'd react like this, Jack. That's why I didn't tell you." "And that's supposed to make me feel better? That you knew it was wrong but did it anyway?" She didn't answer, and that silence was louder than anything she could have said. I stared at her, waiting for some kind of apology or explanation that didn't sound like it came from the Cheater's Guide to Gaslighting. Instead, she turned back to the grocery bag and started unloading it like we were talking about the weather. "You don't get to just move on from this," I said, my voice low and sharp. "You don't get to pretend this didn't happen." Melanie froze, a bottle of kombucha in her hand. "What do you want me to say, Jack? That I made a mistake?" "Fine. I did. But it didn't mean anything." "It meant enough for you to hide it," I said. "And don't insult me by saying it didn't mean anything. If it didn't, you wouldn't have done it." She sighed again, the kind of sigh that said she was done arguing, not because she'd won, but because she didn't care enough to continue. I felt something snap inside me, a thread I didn't even realize I'd been holding on to. Without another word, I grabbed my keys and walked out the door. I didn't have a plan. I just drove, the city lights blurring past my window as I tried to make sense of the mess that had become my marriage. Every argument, every dismissive shrug from Melanie played in my head on repeat, each one a little louder than the last. Eventually, I pulled into the parking lot of a 24-hour diner, the kind of place where the coffee tasted like regret and the waitresses called you Han. I slid into a booth and stared at the menu, my appetite somewhere between non-existent and vengeful. A waitress appeared, her pen poised over her notepad. "What'll it be, Han?" "Black coffee," I said. "And, do you have anything that pairs well with existential crises?" She chuckled, but it wasn't the kind of laugh that reached her eyes. "We've got pie. Pie fixes everything." I doubted that, but I ordered a slice anyway. As I sat there, poking at the crust with my fork, I realized something. Melanie's closure wasn't the problem. It was the symptom. The real issue was that she didn't see me anymore, not as her partner, not as her equal. And maybe I'd stopped seeing her, too. But I wasn't sure if that revelation made me want to fix things, or burn them to the ground. A couple of days passed. Melanie went about her routine as if nothing had happened, casually humming while she folded laundry or scrolling through her phone with that practiced air of nonchalance. She was good, I had to give her that. But there was a crack in her facade now, a slight tension in her shoulders that hadn't been there before. She knew the foundation beneath her was shaky, she just didn't realize how fast it was crumbling. Meanwhile, I'd been doing some digging. And by digging, I mean full-blown espionage. Turns out, when you've spent years managing household finances, it's not hard to spot anomalies. Like, say, unexplained charges on a joint credit card or a recurring payment to a coffee shop across town, the same one Melanie conveniently forgot to mention in her one coffee confession. I knew I was onto something when I found an appointment on her phone calendar labeled meeting, or at a boutique hotel downtown. Real subtle. The day of her meeting, I called in sick to work and parked my car a block away from the hotel. I wasn't proud of what I was about to do, but pride seemed like a luxury at this point. I waited until I saw her walk in, wearing that tailored black coat I'd bought her last Christmas. She looked stunning, which only made me angrier. If she was going to betray me, couldn't she at least do it in sweatpants? Once she was inside, I followed, keeping my distance. She stopped at the front desk, smiling that warm, radiant smile I used to think was mine alone. The clerk handed her a room key, and she headed for the elevator. I waited, counting to 30 before taking the stairs. The adrenaline coursing through me made it easy to climb, though my chest burned with every step. When I reached the hallway, I saw her slipping into a room. Room 408. I stood there for a moment, my mind racing. I had a choice: walk away and pretend this never happened, or rip the bandage off completely. Spoiler alert, I'm not a walk-away kind of guy. I knocked. The door opened a crack, and Melanie's face appeared. For a split second, I saw genuine shock in her eyes, then came the mask. "Jack," she said, her voice laced with forced surprise. "What are you doing here?" "I should be asking you that," I replied, leaning casually against the doorframe. "Room 408, huh? Let me guess, Ryan's on his way up." Her face tightened, but she didn't deny it. Instead, she stepped into the hallway, pulling the door closed behind her. "This isn't what it looks like." "Oh, good," I said, crossing my arms. "Because what it looks like is my wife sneaking off to a hotel to meet her ex." "Jack, please," she hissed, glancing down the hall as if checking for witnesses. "Lower your voice." "Why?" I shot back. "Afraid someone might overhear how your closure sessions require a room with a view?" She flinched, her composure starting to crack. "You're making a scene." "Good," I said, stepping closer. "Because I'm done pretending everything's fine. You want to lie to me, sneak around, meet him in secret? Fine. But at least have the decency to admit it." For a moment, she just stared at me, her eyes flickering with something I couldn't quite place: guilt? Fear? Frustration? Finally, she said, "It's not what you think, Jack. I wasn't going to meet Ryan. I was meeting someone who could help me figure out how to handle this mess." I laughed, a sharp, bitter sound. "Oh, let me guess, Dr. Reynolds. Was she going to prescribe another round of honest dialogue while you plotted your next move?" Melanie's silence was deafening. "That's what I thought," I said, stepping back. "Here's the deal, Melanie. You want to fix this? You start by being honest. Completely, brutally honest. Because if I find out you're lying to me again, we're done. No discussions, no therapy, just done." She nodded slowly, her hands twisting nervously in front of her. "Okay," she said quietly. "You're right. I'll tell you everything." I didn't reply. I just turned and walked away, leaving her standing in the hallway, the door to room 408 still closed behind her. That night, Melanie tried to talk, but I wasn't ready to listen. Instead, I sat on the couch with a beer, staring at the blank TV screen and wondering how we got here. Somewhere deep down, I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe that this could be fixed, that whatever she was hiding wasn't as bad as it seemed. But another part of me, the part that had been lied to, dismissed, and betrayed, was already planning my next move. The next morning, Melanie looked like she hadn't slept. Her hair was messy, her eyes red-rimmed, and for once, she didn't try to cover it up. I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee, pretending to scroll through my phone while she fidgeted with the hem of her sweater. "Jack," she started, her voice small. "We need to talk." "Oh, now we need to talk," I said, not looking up. What a novel idea. She winced but pushed forward, pulling out a chair and sitting across from me. Her hands were shaking slightly, and for a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. "You were right," she said finally. "I wasn't honest with you. About Ryan. About everything." I set my phone down, leaning back in my chair. "Go on." She took a deep breath, like she was about to dive into freezing water. "I met with Ryan because I thought I missed him. Or maybe I missed who I used to be with him. I don't know. But when I saw him, I realized it wasn't about him at all. It was about me. I felt stuck. Like I wasn't enough for you anymore." "Not enough for me?" I repeated, my voice sharper than I intended. "You think sneaking around behind my back was going to fix that?" She shook her head, tears spilling down her cheeks. "No. It was stupid, Jack. I was stupid. And then Dr. Reynolds. What about her?" I asked, narrowing my eyes. Melanie hesitated, her lips trembling. She knew about Ryan. I told her everything, and she encouraged me to explore it. She said it might help me find closure, but all it did was make things worse. I stared at her, the weight of her words sinking in. "So you're telling me our therapist, our couple's therapist, was pushing you to reconnect with your ex?" Melanie nodded, her shoulders sagging under the weight of her guilt. I didn't realize it at the time, but I think she was manipulating me. Maybe even manipulating us. I let out a harsh laugh, shaking my head. "Unbelievable. You brought me to therapy to fix us, and instead, you turned it into an audition for your next mistake." "Jack, please," she said, reaching for my hand. "I'm sorry. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I want to make this right. I'll stop seeing Dr. Reynolds. I'll do whatever it takes. Just don't give up on us." I pulled my hand away, standing up from the table. "I don't think you understand, Melanie. This isn't about forgiveness. It's about trust. And you didn't just break it, you obliterated it." That evening, I packed a bag. Melanie didn't try to stop me, and honestly, I wouldn't have listened if she had. As I drove to a hotel on the other side of town, I felt an odd mixture of relief and sadness. Relief that I was finally taking control, but sadness for what we'd lost, or maybe what we'd never really had. 3 months later, I was living in a small apartment overlooking the city. It wasn't much, but it was mine, no ghosts of the past lingering in the corners. I'd hired a new therapist, one who didn't come with hidden agendas, and I was starting to piece my life back together. Melanie and I hadn't spoken since I left. She'd sent a few texts at first, long apologies that I didn't bother to respond to. Eventually, she stopped trying. Dr. Reynolds, I learned through a mutual acquaintance, had her license revoked. Apparently, my case wasn't the first where she'd crossed ethical lines. That knowledge didn't erase the damage, but it was a small victory nonetheless. One evening, while walking through the park, I saw a couple sitting on a bench, laughing softly as they shared a bag of popcorn. They looked so natural, so effortless, and for a moment, I felt a pang of envy. But then I reminded myself, love isn't effortless. It's a choice, a commitment, and above all, a partnership built on trust. Without that, it's nothing but an illusion. I turned away from the couple, heading back to my apartment. The city lights shimmered in the distance, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was heading in the right direction. My story with Melanie was over, but my life was just beginning. Subscribe to never miss a new story and discover even more captivating tales.